Before we begin, I want to take a moment to honor the cultures behind the stories we are about to explore. The tales shared here come from many peoples, lands, and traditions. I do not change these stories to fit modern expectations or to align with today's social standards. Instead, I present them as they were told, sometimes beautiful, sometimes harsh, sometimes challenging. We are not here to judge the past, but to understand it, to listen, to learn, and to honor the ancestors who carried these stories forward. We also share stories from various religious traditions. These are presented in their historical and spiritual context, with respect for their beliefs that they represent. Every culture deserves respect, context, and acknowledgement, and this space is dedicated to doing exactly that. August 26th, The Warmth. Story 1, Hushang and the Fire Hidden in Stone. Long before people gathered comfortably around hearths, before flame belonged to the ordinary rhythm of the human home, the Persian epic tradition remembers a king named Hushang, one of the earliest rulers of the world and a descendant of the first king, Kayumars. Hushang was remembered as a civilizing king, one who taught people how to draw useful things from the earth, cultivate the land, work metals, and shape a human world from the wilderness around them. But one day, while Hushang traveled with his companions through the mountains, something dark moved across their path. From among the rocks appeared an enormous serpent, terrible in form, with smoke seeming to pour from its mouth and eyes that shone fiercely from its head. Hushang did not flee. He reached down, seized a stone, lifted it with both hands, and hurled it toward the creature. The stone missed. The serpent escaped, but the stone Hushang had thrown crashed violently against another stone. In that instant, something happened that no one had intended. A spark leapt from the collision. Dry matter caught. Flame rose where a moment before there had been nothing but cold rock. The serpent was gone. Yet Hushang stared at what the failed strike had revealed. There had been fire inside the meeting of the stones. According to the Shahnameh, Hushang recognized the flame as a divine gift and gave thanks to God for revealing such a light to humanity. He did not treat it merely as a weapon or curiosity. He understood that this new flame could change human life. That night, Hushang and his people gathered around the fire and celebrated its discovery with a great feast, drinking wine and honoring the flame. And the celebration became associated with Sadeh, the ancient Iranian midwinter festival of fire. From then onward, people knew how to call fire forth from stone. They could warm themselves when cold winds came. They could illuminate darkness. They could cook. They could gather together around a center of heat rather than simply endure whatever temperature the world gave them. Yet the old story does something important with the moment of discovery. Hushang does not actually create fire. He reveals it. The possibility was already present within the world before his stone ever struck another. The mountain had carried the secret without announcing it. Only pressure, movement, and collision made the hidden spark visible. And what began as an act of defense became an act of nourishment. Hushang threw the stone because something threatened him. What returned from that action was warmth for generations. That makes his story an extraordinary beginning for the warmth. We often imagine nourishment as something soft, bread placed before us, arms around our shoulders, a quiet room, a familiar voice. But sometimes the things that eventually sustain us are discovered through friction. Two hard things meet, and somehow there is light between them. A difficult season teaches us what comfort actually means. Loneliness teaches us which relationships feel like home. Hunger teaches us what truly feeds us. Hardship reveals capacities we do not know were waiting inside us. The serpent disappears from Hushang's story almost as quickly as it arrives, because perhaps the serpent was never the greatest discovery. The spark was Hushang could have stared after the creature that frightened him. Instead, he noticed what had ignited at his feet. Sometimes what nourishes us begins the moment we stop staring at what threatened us and notice the fire the encounter uncovered. Story 2, The Fire That Came to the Basotho. Long ago, before fire burned at the center of human homes, the nights belonged entirely to darkness. When the sun disappeared behind the mountains, people had no flame to call it back, in miniature. They could not cook their food over coals or gather beside a hearth when the cold settled over the land. And although they knew fire existed somewhere beyond their keeping, its secret was not theirs. Then, word spread of a place where fire burned, guarded beyond the ordinary reach of human beings, and a young man resolved that he would find it. He left his people behind and traveled toward the distant glow, crossing unfamiliar country and following the signs of smoke, until at last he reached the place where the fire was kept. There, before him, burned the thing his people had never possessed, alive upon the ground, consuming dry wood and transforming it into heat, flame, and glowing coals. But seeing fire was not the same as bringing it home. The flame belonged to those who guarded it, and the young man had come into a place where he had no right simply to reach forward and take what he wanted. He waited, he watched, he learned how the fire behaved, how new wood caused it to leap upward, how neglected flame collapsed into embers, and how even when the bright tongues disappeared, red heat remained hidden among the ash. When his opportunity came, he took a burning piece of wood from the fire and fled. Behind him came the fury of those who had kept the flame for themselves. The young man ran across the country carrying the burning branch. The fire proved to be a difficult treasure. Wind tore at it. The wood blackened beneath his hand. Sparks flew into the grass. Whenever the flame weakened, he stopped long enough to feed it dry twigs before running again. The thing he had risked everything to obtain seemed determined either to die or escape him. Still, he carried it onward. When the burning branch became too short, he touched it to another piece of dry wood and carried the new flame instead. In this way, the fire traveled with him, passing from one branch into another without ever being allowed to disappear completely. At last, the young man saw the homes of his people ahead. They saw him coming through a darkness and then saw something they had never seen approaching them before. A human being carrying flame. People rushed toward him. Dry grass was gathered, branches were piled together. The young man lowered his burning wood into the center, and everyone watched as a strange creature of light spread from twig to twig. Smoke rose, sparks climbed into the night. Faces that darkness had hidden suddenly appeared around the flames. Then came the discovery of everything fire could do. Meat placed near it changed beneath its heat. Water could be warmed, cold hands could be held toward it. Darkness retreated from the place where it burned, but the people also discovered that the gift could vanish. When a fire was neglected, the flames sank lower and lower, until only red coals remained. And if those coals were abandoned, morning brought nothing but cold ash. So the people learned to preserve embers beneath the ashes through the night and wake them again with dry grass, and breathe when morning came. A flame from one hearth could be carried to another, and soon the fire brought by one traveler burned in many homes. The original branch eventually disappeared completely, consumed by the very flame it carried. Yet the fire itself remained. It passed from wood to wood, hearth to hearth, and generation to generation until no one needed to make the long journey to the distant keepers again. Story 3. The Keeper of the Qulliq. Inside a winter dwelling, while darkness stretched across the Arctic, a small flame burned in the shallow stone lamp called a qulliq. It did not leap high like a bonfire. Its flame stretched into a low line along the edge of the lamp. Fed traditionally with oil rendered from sea mammals in a wick made from carefully prepared plant materials such as moss or Arctic cotton. The qulliq belonged especially to the work and knowledge of Inuit women, and keeping one burning required attention. Too much oil could drown the wick. Too little could starve it. A poorly trimmed wick pronounced smoke and soot, while a carefully tended one could give steady light and precious heat through the long northern darkness. A woman tending the qulliq therefore remained close to it, adjusting the wick with a small tool, feeding oil toward the flame, watching its edge, and learning its smallest changes. Around that little lamp, an astonishing amount of life could happen. Meat could be cooked, snow and ice could be melted into water, wet clothing could be dried, tools could be repaired in its light. Children could sleep within the warmth it helped maintain. Clothing could be cut and sewn while storms moved across the land outside. When hunters returned carrying food, the qulliq illuminated the place to which they returned. When the sun remained below the horizon during the darkest part of the year in the far north, Its flame gave the household a light of its own. And because maintaining that flame required skill, the woman who kept the lamp was doing far more than occasionally adding fuel. The wick had to be arranged so that the flame burned evenly along its length. Oil had to be brought toward it as it was consumed. The stone itself absorbed and radiated heat. The lamp had to be watched because the difference between steady warmth and choking smoke could lie in a small adjustment of the wick. Knowledge passed through observation and practice, often from older women to younger women, until tending the lamp became part of the accumulated expertise necessary for life in an Arctic household. In some regions, the qulliq could remain burning for long stretches, its flames renewed and maintained as daily life continued around it. The lamp's importance also extended beyond simple survival. Qulliqs became connected with family, welcome, continuity, and ceremonial life, and the lighting of the lamp continues in Inuit communities today for gatherings, celebrations, remembrance, and other significant occasions. The flame itself might be small, but everything around it could depend upon its careful keeping. Outside, temperatures could fall brutally low, wind could sweep snow across the land, darkness could remain for much of the day or farther north, stretch across weeks of winter. Inside, the keeper bent toward the stone lamp and drew her tool along the wick. One section brightened, another was trimmed. Oil reached the flame, soot diminished. The qulliq burned steadily again. There was no need for the fire to become enormous. A great blaze inside a dwelling would have been dangerous and wasteful. The skill was in making a controlled flame do exactly what the household needed it to do, hour after hour, while the people around it ate, worked, rested, spoke, repaired clothing, cared for children, and waited through winter. Eventually, a child watching beside the lamp would become old enough to understand why the keeper's hands moved as they did. She would learn how the wick should look when the oil needed attention, how the flame sounded and smoked when something was wrong. One day, another pair of hands would take the tending tool. The stone lamp remained between them, and the flame continued along its edge. Story 4. The Old Man Who Made Withered Trees Bloom. Long ago in Japan, an elderly couple lived quietly with their little white dog, Shiro, who they loved as though he were their own child. They were poor, but whatever food entered their home was shared with him, and Shiro followed the old man everywhere he went. Nearby lived another elderly couple whose hearts were very different. They watched their neighbors with jealousy, always wondering whether some hidden fortune explained their happiness. One day, Shiro began barking excitedly in the garden. He scratched at the earth, ran to his master, then returned and scratched again until the old man understood that the dog wanted him to dig. The old man brought a hoe and opened the ground beneath Shiro's paws. Instead of roots or stones, his tool struck something buried. He dug deeper and uncovered treasure, traditionally described as gold coins and precious things hidden beneath the soil. The old couple rejoiced, but their sudden good fortune did not remain secret for long. Their greedy neighbors demanded to borrow Shiro, convinced that the dog could lead them to another treasure. Reluctantly, the old man allowed Shiro to go. The neighboring man dragged the dog through his land and ordered him to find gold. Eventually, Shiro scratched at the earth. The man began digging furiously, expecting riches, but instead uncovered only filth and worthless rubbish. Enraged, he struck Shiro and killed him. When the kind old man learned what had happened, he carried his beloved companion home and buried him beneath the earth. Over Shiro's grave, he planted a tree, and in time it grew tall and strong. The old man treasured it because it stood where his dog rested. Eventually, he fashioned part of the tree into a wooden mortar. And when the old couple placed rice inside to make mochi, something extraordinary happened. The rice multiplied and became treasure. Again, the jealous neighbors heard of the miracle. Again, they borrowed what belonged to the old couple. And again, in their hands, the wonder produced only foulness. Furious, they smashed and burned the mortar, reducing the tree that had grown above Shiro's grave to ash. The old man arrived too late to save it. All that remained of the tree was a pile of gray powder. He gathered the ashes carefully and carried them home. Then, as he walked with them, a little ash escaped his hand and drifted into the branch of a withered tree. Before his eyes, blossoms burst from the dead-looking wood. The old man stared in amazement. He scattered another handful. Another bare tree erupted into flowers. Soon he was walking through the countryside, throwing Shiro's ashes into the air. Wherever they settled, branches that had stood empty suddenly became covered in magnificent blossoms. News of the wonder reached a powerful daimyo traveling through the region. The Lord stopped beneath a withered tree and asked whether the old man truly possessed the power to make dead branches flower. The old man climbed the tree and scattered his ashes. The tree exploded into bloom. Petals drifted down over the daimyo and his attendants, and the delighted Lord rewarded the old man richly, praising him as Hanasaka, Jisan, the old man who makes flowers bloom. Naturally, the greedy neighbor heard what had happened. He scraped together some of the remaining ashes and rushed after the Lord, announcing that he too could make dead trees flower. He climbed a withered tree and threw his ashes into the air, but no blossoms appeared. Instead, the ash blew directly into the daimyo's face and eyes, covering him and his attendants in soot. The furious Lord had the impostor punished and driven away. The kind old man returned home to his wife carrying the gifts he had received, and the seasons continued to turn. Shiro did not return. The tree above his grave had been cut down and burned. Even the mortar made from its wood was gone. Yet each spring, when branches opened beneath clouds of blossoms, the old couple could remember the little white dog who had first scratched at the earth, and how somehow, after treasure, death, tree, mortar, flame, and ash, what remained of Shiro had filled the bare branches with flowers. Daily Thread for August 26th. What nourishes me? Yesterday we stood at the dawn and watched the world begin again. Today the fire comes closer. It leaves the horizon, leaves the sky, leaves the enormous cycles of suns and seasons, and settles somewhere much smaller, beside us. This is the warmth. And today's stories remind us that fire does more than illuminate. It feeds, it gathers, it transforms, it makes places habitable and ordinary things precious. Hushang discovered fire almost by accident. He threw a stone toward a serpent, missed, and watched stone strike stone until a spark appeared between them. The flame had not been placed conveniently into his hands. It emerged through collision. Yet once Hushang saw it, he recognized something worth keeping. The spark became something people could gather around, something that could transform the human relationship with darkness and cold. Then, our Basotho story carried fire across distance. One person reached the flame, but possessing it was not enough. He had to bring it home. He protected it against wind, fed it when it weakened, transferred it from one branch to another, and finally placed it among his people, where one flame became many hearths. Fire changed when it was shared. What had belonged to one journey became warmth, available to an entire community. Then we entered the Arctic and found the qulliq, where fire became smaller still. No enormous bonfire, no blaze climbing toward heaven, just a carefully maintained line of flame along the edge of a stone lamp, tended by knowledgeable hands. Yet around that little flame people could cook, melt snow, dry clothing, work, speak, rest, raise children, and endure winter. Small does not mean insignificant. Sometimes the thing holding an entire life together is so ordinary that we barely notice it until it disappears. And finally came Shiro and the old man who made withered trees bloom. There the warmth stopped being literal altogether. The old couple fed and loved a little dog without knowing that anything extraordinary would ever come from it. Even after Shiro died, even after the tree above his grave was destroyed, even after the mortar was burned, something remained. Ash landed upon bare branches and flowers opened. 4 very different stories, but together they bring us to today's question. What nourishes me? Not what entertains me, not what distracts me, not what gives me a quick burst of excitement and leaves me emptier afterward. What actually feeds me? There's a difference. We know it with food instinctively. Something can taste wonderful without sustaining the body for very long. Our inner lives work that way too. Some things consume our attention without giving anything back. Some relationships demand constant fuel while producing no warmth. Some ambitions keep us moving while quietly starving everything else. And some tiny things we might dismiss because they are not dramatic enough, leave us fuller than we were before. Maybe nourishment is the person around whom your shoulders unconsciously relax. Maybe it is making something with your hands. Maybe it is walking outside before anyone else is awake. Music, books, cooking, animals, plants, prayer, learning, silence, laughter that makes your stomach hurt. A conversation where nobody is waiting for their turn to speak. A room that feels like yours. A meal prepared slowly. 10 uninterrupted minutes doing the thing you keep insisting you do not have time to do. Your qulliq does not have to look impressive to anyone else. It only has to keep you warm. And perhaps nourishment also requires us to notice what we repeatedly give away. The Basotho fire survives because the traveler does not simply carry one burning stick until nothing remains. He transfers the flame. The qulliq survives because someone continues feeding it. Hushang recognizes the spark and chooses to preserve it. The old couple's kindness toward Shiro begins long before there is treasure, magic, or reward. Nourishment requires relationship. We feed what feeds us. We return to what restores us. We protect the conditions under which we can continue becoming ourselves. So today, instead of asking what enormous transformation your life needs, ask something smaller. What makes me feel warm inside my own life? And then notice whether you are actually giving it fuel. Perhaps you already know exactly what nourishes you, but you keep treating it as optional because responsibility always gets the first serving. Perhaps you have become very skilled at keeping everyone else's lamps burning while yours survives on whatever oil remains. Perhaps what you need is not another dramatic reinvention. Maybe you need dinner at the table instead of over the sink, an afternoon outside, an hour making something useless and beautiful, a phone call, a book, sleep, music loud enough to fill the kitchen, something cooked slowly, something grown, something shared, something that makes the inside of your life feel inhabited again. Warmth is not wasted simply because it produces nothing except warmth. A hearth does not apologize for being a hearth. A flower does not justify blooming by becoming something more productive afterward. Some things sustain us precisely because they ask nothing from us, except that we come close enough to receive them. Yesterday we asked what begins again. Today we feed whatever answered. Give it wood, give it oil, give it time, give it attention, because beginnings cannot live forever on the excitement of beginning. Eventually, whatever we want to keep alive must be nourished. You do not have to burn brighter today. Find what warms you, move a little closer, and feed the fire that feeds you.